Hello. Hello, good evening. Very warm welcome on behalf of the Goethe Institute London to this online event accompanying our screening of Berlin Alexanderplatz. My name is Burhan Qurbani and I'm the film programmer at the Institute. But I have a very small role today, this evening, because we have two wonderful guests. The director of Berlin Alexanderplatz, Burhan Qurbani, and Professor Myria Georgiou from the London School of Economics, who will be in conversation. I encourage you to ask your questions with the two of them being here. You can do this in the Q&A chat. And if you haven't seen the film yet, you still have a chance until tomorrow evening. You have to start it by 7 o'clock tomorrow evening. And I would like to express my thanks to the Migration Film Festival for cooperating with us on this screening and on this event tonight. And I'm very happy that Laura from the Migration Collective is here, and she's going to say a few words about the festival. And I'll pass over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Stanke. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of London Migration Film Festival. The festival has been running since 2016, just when, after the so-called refugee crisis, we were seeing that there were a lot of new narratives about migration that were emerging on the media. But a lot of them we found were problematic because they depicted people on the move, primarily either as victims and passive people or enemies and active destroyers of the status quo. We found that these narratives were very detrimental also because they deprived the people on the move from their humanity. We therefore decided to start the London Migration Film Festival to use it as a platform to present new narratives about migration, and in particular narratives that will see people on the move as people primarily, and to reinstate the humanity inbuilt within migration. Since then, we have presented more than 100 films in London that focus on migration, and not just on people moving, but also on what it means to be a second generation person, what are the intersection of migration with themes such as gender, war, displacement, labor, love, and we try and find new genres, really like comedy, and we also like to, when possible, to apply new lenses on narratives about migration. We are very, very happy that we have been able to partner with the Goethe Institute for this screening, and we are very pleased to be joined tonight by two great guests, in particular Myria Georgiou, who is professor in the Department of Media and Communication at the London School of Economics, where she also serves as research director. She researches and teaches on migration and urbanization in the context of intensified mediation. And you can find much more about her on Goethe Institute webpage. I'm going to share a link on the chat. And we are also joined by Burhan Qurbani, who is the director of the film that we're discussing tonight. And I think that it would probably be much better if I leave the place to them now so they can have a conversation about the film and about films about migration in general. Thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I hope you will enjoy this chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I think it's my turn to come in and to thank, of course, Goethe Institute and the Migration Collective for inviting me this conversation. So my name is Myria Georgiou. You have heard where I'm coming from. I'm a researcher who looks into questions of migration and urbanization through the lens of the media. And of course, I am delighted to be part of this conversation, which precisely brings media, the city and migration together. And my role is mostly to initiate the conversation because I think our guest of honor today is Burhan Qurbani, who is the director of Berlin Alexanderplatz. So the two of us will start this event by having a conversation for approximately 30 to 35 minutes before opening the floor for questions and for a broader discussion. I invite you all to put your questions in the Q&A during the conversation, and of course we will take them on as we go ahead in the discussion. First, before we start this session, I would like to introduce Burhan Qurbani to you. So Burhan is a German director, writer, and actor of Afghan heritage. His parents moved to Western Germany in 1979 as political refugees from Afghanistan 1 year before his birth. His graduation film, Shahada, and his second feature film, We're Young, We're Strong, won numerous awards. His third film, which I suspect everyone who's attending this event has seen or is in the process of seeing, is Berlin Alexanderplatz, that came out at 2022. The film is a powerful adaptation of the original novel by Alfred Doblin with the same title, which is considered by many as a major piece of German literature and the first German urban novel. The original version, as you might know, takes place in Berlin and its urban underbelly at times of its crumbling Weimar Republic in the 1930s. In the original version of the book and the series adaptation by Fassbinder in the 80s, we see the main character being a former prisoner. His name is Franz Bickerkopf. And he's a former prisoner who tries to make a new life after prison and to be a good man, as he says himself. But instead, he finds himself lost in a life of crime and emotional loss in Berlin's city streets. In Qurbani's version, Franz, or Francis, his original name, is an undocumented migrant from Bissau. He's an undocumented migrant who, like many others in his position, lands in Berlin after surviving a treacherous journey, a journey that many migrants and refugees experience. Francis is a survivor, but of course, survival comes at a cost. So Burhan Qurbani unravels the underbelly of Berlin through the main character who lands in the city. And the main character is played by Velket Bunge. But also, it is not only that the city is revealed to us in the film, but also the character and the character's troubles, a troubled migrant who seeks to find himself in the new city where he lands. His troubles, as we see in the film, are emotional, ontological, and material. This is a story, of course, that is familiar to many urban migrants and refugees, not only in Europe, but across the world. And it is a story of struggle, of survival, of loss and seeking dignity and hope when constantly faced with the visible and the invisible violence of borders. Borders that determine and name and contain certain people within the narrow frames, either of the victim or the perpetrator, frames that we see also reinforced and confirmed in many of the media representations that we're used to see in both news and in fiction. However, we have a different story, different set of representations that we will be discussing here today in relation to Berlin Alexanderplatz. So Qurbani is a child of migrants himself, and he turns to these many struggles with sensibility and passion and raising and inviting us, I think, to think about both the city and migration through their codependence. And I would like to start this conversation and my questions by asking him about that choice. How much is that choice to locate, to adapt this classic novel to the experience of migration and to narrate it through the story of an undocumented migrant? So what is behind this choice, Burhan?
Okay, Myria, thank you so much for your introduction. Thank you to the Goethe Institute and the Migration Film Festival for the invitation. If I'm allowed, I would just like to say a couple of words before I start to answer your question. I think that maybe many of the people, and you included, are a bit confused, shocked, hurt by the situation that we have right now in Ukraine. And I'm still struggling to find words or clear thoughts about it. I can only say that I was born, as you said, 1 year after the Russian invasion in Afghanistan, in the country of my parents, and not only because of that, but also because I find a certain kinship in this moment and in this situation with the Ukrainian people. I would like to express my solidarity with them in this uncalled, this neo-fascistic, this imperialistic occupation, invasion, and war. Sorry, this is just from the top. I think that the choice to tell the story from the perspective of a migrant, especially from a migrant of sub-Saharan Africa, came, I think, with the experience, of course, of being a child of migrants myself, of trying to give a voice to people who are not heard, or who don't have a lobby or a platform or a megaphone to express their situation. And I come from a group, and I try to describe the bigger group, people, not only people from Afghanistan, but people with a Muslim background, with a background in this cultural circle. And especially in Germany or in Berlin, where we have hundreds of thousands of people from Turkey, from Arabic countries or Arabic-speaking countries, and from Afghanistan, we have a representation just by numbers, and a voice that comes with it. But when I was starting to live in Berlin, I realized that especially immigrants from the African continent, they don't have the same kind of voice, representation, platform, and way to express themselves. And I felt that I wanted to make a movie about this community, but one that shouldn't be ignored too easily. So consciously or subconsciously, I decided to choose like a starting point, or like the novel of Berlin of Alfred Döblin as a piece of very important German literature, as a vehicle, so that the story of my main character Francis cannot be ignored. Sorry, I talked too much. I'm very sorry.
No, not at all, not at all. And I think it's very important to remind us of the context in which we're having this conversation. So we're having about 500,000 people seeking safety as we speak. And I think it's important to think about this context. And I want us to reflect a bit more about that in a minute. But to follow up on what you have said so far, I wanted to ask you to talk to us a bit more about the relationship between the original novel and your adaptation. So in the previous version, we have another kind of outcast, if you like, as a central character, who's of course a former prisoner, and who's also, as you said in other interviews, an outsider in the city, a stranger, someone who's not supposed to belong, who's there but does not belong. So why is it important for you to, in this adaptation, to bring the stranger, the outsider, as a migrant? And also, what does a migrant in our societies have in common with a prisoner in the 1930s?
So first of all, to the audience, we checked this before, and it's not a sign of disrespect that I'm going to smoke. I'm a bit nervous, and I'm a chain smoker, so please forgive me if this bothers you. But it's my kitchen, so I'm going to do it. Secondly, I only made 3 movies yet, and I realized that there seems to be a red line, like a certain issue that I come back over and over again, and it is something about the stranger in a strange land, and I think it has a lot to do with the way how I grew up as a child of refugees, but also as a child in a majority white society that is always visible as a stranger. And that that I always felt not completely home, not completely accepted, not completely part of the community or of the society that I grew up in. And I think that I tried to voice this feeling of a shaky ground in my movies, in all of them. Even in my second movie, where there's a bunch of neo-Nazis, German neo-Nazis in focus, but they're from East Germany. The country was just reunited, and they feel strange in this new country. So I think this urge to find a common ground in the feeling of being lost or not welcome or not at home is something that I was looking for in this movie too. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. In a paradoxical way, and it's really, I think, such a thought-provoking moment in the film. You represent France or Francis as a stranger, someone who's so were repeatedly reminded that he's an outsider, and even when he tries not to be an outsider, he's put in his place in so many ways, right? But there's this powerful and paradoxical moment where he says, in the film, I am the German dream. I am Germany. So what is going on there?
I felt that he the whole speech is inspired by three very different sources. The first one is actually, like, I've been in New York at the very day when Muhammad Ali died, and they were playing a lot of clips of him and the way how he saw himself as a black man in the United States, especially in the 60s and 70s, in a time of racial tension, and he himself described himself as the American dream. And that is one part of it. Of course, there's a bit of Coppola's Godfather in there, like I love America. And the last part, the last source that I used or abused is Hannah Arendt's essay, We Refugees, and where she, because I mean, before he says I am the German dream, he says, don't call me refugee, call me migrant, call me new arrival, but don't call me refugee. And I found these words by Hannah Arendt, who is a Jewish refugee fleeing from the Nazi dictatorship, felt that she didn't want to be called a refugee when she was in the United States, because she found this word extremely stigmatizing and belittling, and not giving her a chance to arrive, but always keeping her in this certain status quo of being still on the move, on the run. And I gave these words to my main character because I understood these words by Hannah Arendt or I took them very, very, very personally, and I understand from my point of view what she means.
Mm-hmm. I think I understand what you're saying, because very often people who have migrant or refugee background only appear in the public domain within that very narrow category, and people are usually only allowed to speak as refugees and migrants, right? And when they speak as something else, they don't seem to fit very often the narratives in the media, and we can come back to that. But I wonder, and of course it would be interesting to know what other members of the audience feel, that when he states also that I am not a refugee, I don't want to be called refugee, but I am Germany, if this is a form of a political statement, the margins seeking to get into the center of the public narrative. Is that something that you also are thinking, or am I reading?
No, I think it is a very strong statement, and it is there's a certain hubris in that statement, but I think that my character in that moment in the film is just stating that he he doesn't accept the status in which he's put in, and that he wants to grow out of it. He's verbalizing it, I think, without really understanding what it means, but I find it one of the more dangerous sentences in the movie. Just a little later, a couple of minutes later in the movie, there's a different scene where a trans woman is saying something similar. She's saying, we are the new Germans. We decided for ourselves who we want to be. And I find that sentence even more dangerous, because she says that we want to redefine what it means to be German, or to be European, or to come from a certain country. So there's a certain bitterness in the thing that in the way and in the context in which Francis says that he is Germany, that he's the German dream, because to be honest, in the moment when he's proclaiming that, he's basically acting in a he's basically trying to get more people to work with him in the criminal business, and he tries to convince them to follow him in an almost cynical way. But later, when this trans woman is saying that, I think it's a much more mature way to state that that society is changing, and that people who've been outcasts now are staking their ground.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry. Like, English is not my first language, so I'm sometimes fighting with the words, and I'm not sure if I can express myself in as precisely as I wish I could. I hope it doesn't sound completely confused what I'm telling you.
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm thinking, of course, of you used the word danger. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous sin and dangerous words. I guess I understand that as being about the danger of confronting a comfortable majority with the statement.
I mean, for example, when you were asking, sorry, and I didn't answer the question before, like the parallels between Berlin Alexanderplatz, the novel that was written in the 20s, and our new adaptation. Dublin was writing in the time when the Third Reich was about to rise, and as a Jew who was converted to Christianity, but still with the Jewish background, of course, he had a different point of view, but he saw a democracy failing. And I think the moment when we started to work on Berlin Alexanderplatz, we also saw in Germany, but also all around Europe, and I'm afraid all around the world, that there was a new rise of nationalism and populism, and it seemed tempting to have a character who is stating this like against the current political situation in Europe, who's stating, I'm black, I'm from Africa, I'm a refugee, but I am Germany.
Mm-hmm. And someone said, just to reassure you also, you might have seen it, that one of the audience members says that your thoughts are clear and thrilling. So okay. I think we're on the right track. Yes, in relation to this parallel, of course, and you spoke about, of course, the original novel is written at times of the rising racism and Nazism, really dystopic times. Is there a parallel then to our times? Is it? Do you feel that we're living in very dark times in terms of where the West is going? I mean, of course, you mentioned that we live obviously in difficult times in relation to what is happening in Ukraine, but is the West also putting democracy?
I told you before that I will be very careful to make certain statements, because I'm a filmmaker, not a political scientist, not a social scientist. But I think it's quite obvious that there seems to be, and we are on the edge of a new era, obviously since a week, but also before, where communication, information is tainted, where democracy is questioned, where pluralism is put like it is put to us as a threat, and we have a strong tendency of anti-intellectualism. I mean, extremely. We can see it extremely, of course, in this Corona situation and mess that we are in, and how science is questioned in any way. So I think there's I think more and more the job of our generation is to save democracy and the way how we perceive the world, and that there is and that we have to move out of different bubbles and try to find common ground again. And I mean, obviously we are divided, and this division makes room for propaganda and misinformation and destruction of democracy in general. But I want to be careful with that, because that is my perspective. That's how I look at the world. I'm sure that other people have a different point of view, but I find it extremely dangerous. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think obviously I'm not a director and you're not a social scientist, but I think you're making a film that seems like it touches upon these very difficult questions. And I know the representations in the film, and also the way that you have discussed it to me appear that you're thinking about it politically. And I want to pick up on a point that you made in an interview to the blog, the Goethe Institute blog, where you're talking about the post-colonial allegory, that the story is a post-colonial allegory, and you refer to the undercurrents of oppression and the structures of racism. So do you think, as not a political scientist, not a social scientist, as a director, do you think this is a political film?
I really don't dare to say yes, but I hope it is. I had a discussion with my dramaturg during the development of the movie, and he said, Burhan, if you choose a black man from Sub-Sahara who is an immigrant in Germany, and his antagonist is a white man, you automatically have the post-colonial infrastructure in your narrative. Don't deny it, work with it. And we try to not too obvious and not too much in your face, but also not hidden. Talk about structural racism and the situation of refugees in Germany, without trying to give answers on the one hand, and on the other hand, we try to sneak in images and small moments that give a hint for the audience to explore that theme without giving answers, because I always think it's dangerous when movies try to give answers. I think it's always much more challenging for the audience if they have to find their own answers instead of having like people like me who are intellectually challenged to give them all the answers.
Mm-hmm. I think, as you said, I read it as well, that post-colonial context and perhaps a post-colonial allegory is throughout the film. One of the visual elements that really intrigued me is the reoccurring visuality of the African religious rituals that return repeatedly as visuals, as memories that are haunting Francis. And those visual moments appear as quite different and distinct and outside the narrative, the main narrative of the film. And perhaps you think otherwise, so this is my interpretation, of course. So I wonder, one, why these African religious rituals come in the film repeatedly, and two, To me, they appear as situating the main character outside that space of Berlin. So that connection that he has to somewhere else, to a very different culture, seemed to be fundamental to who he is. So he almost belongs to a place that is not Berlin. And this is his psyche and his deepest being.
So I think that you're referring to the memories, the images of the bull and the sacrifice of the bull. To be honest, this is like an essential part of the movie, of the original novel. Dublin describes in a whole chapter describes the slaughter of a white bull, and he makes a connection to the biblical image of Abraham and Isaac, and this image of slaughtering or like sacrificing a bull / a human being is part of the overall narrative of the novel Berlin Alexanderplatz. When we were adapting the novel, which is, I mean, extremely hard when you have this kind of when you have this complex piece of literature, is always hard, and we tried to save as much as possible from Dublin's brilliant writing. And this was one of the moments that we thought was very important, but for a long time we struggled because we didn't know what kind of images to find. And when we were casting Velket, when we after the casting we met for coffee, and we talked for hours about the script and about the film that we wanted to do. He told me about rituals that he knew from Guinea-Bissau, where he's from. That his father, when he came to Europe, that they sacrificed an animal for him. They put him in the skin of the animal to give him the energy or the force of this being, so that he would have the power to make it over to Europe. And I took this story of Velket's father and tried to integrate it into the story. So if you see the bull, then you have it's a mixture of Alfred Dublin's idea of the sacrifice of the animal, the biblical idea, and also the background of my main character and the actor who's playing it, and his personal story. It was very intriguing for us because it made it very organic to tell it like that, without getting into a kind of cultural appropriation where we try to visualize a certain exoticism or something. So it came very much from Velket himself to propose this as an idea, and it worked. For me, it works quite fine. What I also wanted to say is you referred to the image. Another thing is that a film seems to be, or that's how I experience it, an extremely agile medium, because when we premiered the movie in 2020, most people were asking about the refugee aspect, but also, of course, the connection from our movie to the 1920s and 1930s. But only a couple of months after the film was released, there was a new movement, especially in the US, but basically all around the world, which was called Black Lives Matters. And suddenly the film was read in a completely different context. Suddenly it was not only a film about immigration, about refugees, or about or like the connection to the novel, but it got a certain currency. It was current in the sense that suddenly it gave it was part of a completely different discussion, and I find it amazing that suddenly people were talking about the film, but in a completely different context, about the context of Black Lives Matters. And I wanted to refer to the sound because we were mixing the sound, and you can hear the breathing. Like the film starts and ends with breathing, the breathing of Francis, and I cannot but think of this claim, "I cannot breathe," like this. So film seems to be very dynamic.
Yes,
what I
yes,
was.
indeed. And I wondered, you're saying that if people made the connections as well, because you say it's a different context, Black Lives Matter, and the movement around it and the context of migration, but actually it's not such a different context, because both realities of migration and racism have to do with racialization and marginalization of certain people on the basis of racial politics. And did people make these connections?
It's them who made it. They made me aware of it. I think that when you're a filmmaker, you go through the movie and you work with the movie in a very narrow point of view, your very personal point of view. And the amazing thing is, for me as a filmmaker, are these moments, for example, when I'm discussing with you or with another audience, and they find something in my movie that I haven't seen or not even intended, but it is there. It might be that I or my team, we subconsciously worked on something that we couldn't grasp yet at the moment of shooting, or maybe or maybe we chose a form that is so open that it gives you as an audience the possibility to interpret like your own point of view into a film. And I think that's the more interesting idea.
Mm-hmm. We will open the floor in a while. I want to raise two more questions with you and invite in the meantime anyone who would like to add any comments or questions, please do on the chat. We were just talking about race, and of course another important element of the representations in the film is that of gender. And there's a number of very strong female characters in the film. But most of the women in the film appear within the context of sex work. And of course, there's a parallel there with the original. But I was wondering how you thought about keeping the centrality of sex work in the representation of female characters.
Yeah, I have to say that this is something that I'm not so happy with 2 years after finishing the film, that right now I'm for the first time I'm working together with writing a script together with a woman, and I realize all the shortcomings that I have as a male cis heterosexual writer when developing female characters. And I think that I wish that I would have had this point of view much earlier. You are right that Dublin gives us this. Like it's the characters in his novel are mostly female sex workers, and the men are all criminal. And we translated it also in our time. So the men in our movie are also all criminal. The women are mostly sex workers. Although I have to say that the character of Eva is not a sex worker in that sense. But she works in a business where there's a lot of sex. That's true. But what we try to do, even with the shortcomings of our gender, my co-writer and I, we try to research as thoroughly as possible. And together with Jella, the actress who plays Mieze, we talked with sex workers and with their experiences, and tried to be as faithful as possible, and to not show too many cliches of sex work. And I hope it worked, but I'm afraid that it didn't work as good as I wish it had.
Well, this is a creativity comes with reflection, and I think it's very important to talk to that shortcomings, as you call them yourself. So I want now to, with my last question or last couple of questions while we wait for the audience, I want to zoom out a bit and to talk about how you reflect on the way migrants appear in Western media more generally, and whether you had that in mind when you were developing the film. So very often what we see is that, as we mentioned already, is that there are repeatedly very narrow representations of migrants in Western media, and usually they are framed either as victims or perpetrators, and they can only speak in very specific voices. And this, of course, comes in direct contrast with the way that the Western subjects are usually represented in films, where personal agency and people's power over their fate is prominent, especially in fiction. Have you thought about this context, either in relation to news or in relation to cinematic representations? Was it something that concerned you, or you wanted to talk to or against to in your film?
I mean, I can answer this question only of my point of view from Germany, and how the narratives are told in the German film industry. Of course, there are some international movies that I also know, I've seen, and so on. But I think that the representation of migration has been dominated or has been dominantly told by people who have never been in that situation, and I think that has changed in the last years, or especially in Germany. I have the feeling that there are more and more colleagues, male and female, with a migrant background that are as writers and as directors working in the film industry and telling their own narratives. And this is extremely refreshing, and it's extremely interesting to see how they paint their own images and their own pictures. I think that we are not on a level of complete equality, but we're coming close each year. But still, also, I mean, my film is heavily inspired by like like American gangster and genre movies, like The Godfather, like Scarface, films that also tell immigration stories through the genre of gangster films, but I think in a very smart way, using the cliches and the genre to tell something about the status quo of the country in which these stories are set. And I'm looking forward to see in the coming years movies from my colleagues, not only from Germany but from other countries who have a migration background, and how they will develop this issue, and in which direction they will go. Because I think I just to briefly talk about myself, I come from a generation of foreigners in Germany that we kind of accepted a certain degree of racism, discrimination, because we were very few, and it was like we always tried. We were always like happy enough to have what we have, and just swallow the racism, you know, to eat our bowl of shit. And I have the feeling that the generation, I'm 40 now, and the generation that is coming, that I'm seeing now, that are in their late 20s and early 30s, they have a completely different view on and they demand a completely different thing from our society. They feel, and very rightly so, they feel entitled to be treated fairly, and to not be discriminated. And I have to say, and this is also a shortcoming, I have to say, I took racism as something completely normal and something that I have to cope with and that I have to accept. And I have the feeling this new generation doesn't accept this anymore, and I'm very proud of that, of them, not of them.
Wonderful. And I think that's a good point to open to questions. We do have a question from Jeannie Levet. I'm not sure if you can see it. I will read it for you and the audience. There is much of the novel in your brilliantly adapted film, but the very upbeat ending surprised me, especially considering the comments you have made tonight about not answering questions, but perhaps leaving things more open-ended. What do you think?
That's. I'm afraid the answer has to be very, very brief or very, very long. I can tell you that we had two endings till the last day of editing. A very harsh one, and maybe a better one in the sense of like in a filmic way, more elegant and more on point, or this ending. And I can only say that at that time when we were finishing the editing of the film, the AfD party, the right-wing party in the German parliament, was in the uprise. And we thought that this kind of happy ending where there's a new child between the races and between the ethnicities, that could be this new German child, would be like a middle finger for the people who were like denying that that Germany is a country of immigrants, and that that integration is possible, and that there is a future where we can live together in a kind of harmony. So I made a political choice instead of an aesthetic choice. I chose to tell an utopia instead of a strong ending. But to be honest, this is a bit of a regret, and also it's not a regret because I think it was right.
Great. We have another question by Andrew Weber. I'm interested in the use of masks in the film. Could you say something about this?
I think it's only in the very end that we use masks. So there's a mask ball, like a kind of carnival, and I think there's also like Mieze, one of the main characters, and the sex worker. She's wearing wigs all the time to switch into different characters. I love the question because it was never asked before. I'm not sure if I can give you a very smart answer to that, but I think we use them especially in this ballroom scene, in this party scene, to go to give a hint into this to work with this post-colonial theme that we had. But I really have to go think deeper about it, so I will not embarrass myself by giving you like a stupid question answer right now. Maybe I can give it on another time.
Thank you. At the moment, there are no other questions, so I would like to bring another issue that I have been thinking about in relation to that broader context. You mentioned in a hopeful way, and I hope that the trend continues, that in Germany you have a new generation of migrant directors and filmmakers and so on that develop different kinds of voices. Also, of course, the German context for people who sit outside Germany, and especially in the UK, has been a context of receiving new migrants and refugees that oftentimes has been admired. And especially at times when at the UK there's continuous hostility, and of course, formal policy is very resistant to opening its borders to those seeking security. So from where you sit in your kitchen in Berlin, is this indeed that welcome culture? Is it indeed something that is changing the country and can allow you to have the utopian ending that you want to have in your film? Or is it just another kind of media representation that we just see repeatedly?
I mean, I love that that you have this reception of Germany, which of course I don't see it like that. I think it's not so the image is not that clear. The welcome culture that this euphoric moment that we had in 2015, I think it disappeared quite quickly. It doesn't mean that society suddenly turned into a more racist society. But I think that people who were potentially afraid of refugees, of strangers, of aliens in Germany, they kind of got even more afraid or even more aggressive in their point of view, in their politics, and which is also one of the reasons why why we have a right-wing, like an openly right-wing party in parliament. They are obviously the voice, the 10% that are not very welcome towards refugees. But on the other hand, I have the feeling that the move of our society towards a more open and liberal society is kind of unstoppable. I think that especially in the younger generation, I see a openness and a political engagement that I was lacking when I was a kid, and so I am a pessimist, but I'm quite hopeful still. I'm not sure if that's a contradiction, but what I see is that it didn't get better, but what I hope is that the movement in which you are already cannot be stopped by right-wing people.
Mm-hmm. It's a good contradiction to have, I think. We have a couple of more questions. We have a question from Gözde Naiboglu. Thank you all for this event and to Burhan for this great film. I wanted to ask about the neo-noir aesthetic. The mise-en-scène and lighting, especially, are remarkable, stunning, and exude a dystopian tone, contrary to the utopianism in intention that you just mentioned. Visually very different from We're Young. I wonder if Burhan would like to tell us about this neo-noir aesthetic.
That's a very nice question, because I think it's has very much to do with my cinematographer, my DOP, Yoshi Heimrath, who I've been working with for almost 20 years now. Since film school, we've been friends and collaborators. And every time when we start to work on a new project, I think because first we are easily bored and we are looking for new challenges, aesthetic challenges. Yoshi comes up with a I think always brilliant approach towards the visual world that we want to create, and we always want to create a very singular and very hermetic and clear visual world. At the time when we started to build the visual universe of Alexanderplatz, and that's the way how we work. I had a catalog of thousands of pictures. So when I'm scrolling through Instagram or through the web, I'm always making screenshots. I'm putting them together into folders, and I'm at a certain point when I have a certain density of them, I send it to Yoshi, and he acts like a filter. So he knows the script, he knows me, but he also tries to, as a cinematographer, tries to find like a unique perspective. And so he took those thousands of pictures, maybe 4,000 pictures that I sent him, and made a choice of, let's say, 100. And already within this 100 images, there was a tendency towards this how you call it, neo-noir aesthetic. So the neon lights, the big city as a moloch, as something that devours people, the light that is both blinding and enlightening, and but extremely artificial, something that it never feels like natural. And I have to say that it is Yoshi's work that kind of clarifies or kind of builds this hermetic world. Yeah. And I wonder.
There are two more questions. Yeah. I don't know if you can see them. So there's a question from Aaron. Could you talk a bit about the locations in the film? Did you regard them as typical of Berlin or more generally as typical of cities?
Mm-hmm. So this is also an aspect when you live in Berlin, you watch movies about Berlin, you realize at a certain point that almost every place in Berlin was already shot. you know, like it's already used. And very early we made a decision to find locations and also like to build a world that most people don't know or haven't seen yet when they were watching movies about Berlin. So I think to answer your question, we try to create our own Berlin, a Berlin that is not typical for any city, but also typical for every city or major city, like which is big enough and to surprise us and the audience, and also to put him like I think that one of the one of my favorite comments about my movie is I feel like I'm on a trip. And I like the idea that we take the audience not only on a narrative trip, but also on a visual trip into a world that they don't know. And then when you leave the cinema or when you stop watching the movie, your point of view is just shifted a little bit. So I hope that worked.
And the last question I think that we can get is from MJ Bowers. Did you get any inspiration from seeing the two other filmed versions of Berlin Alexanderplatz, or did you rely more on the novel?
To be really honest, in the very beginning of our research, I watched the original film from the 1920s, 30s. And it helped us because the script was also written by Alfred Dublin, so it helped us to structure our film because the beats were set much stricter than in the novel, like the narrative beats. When does who appear? When does what happen? Fassbinder's version is much more giganteous and heavy, and also it loses focus a lot. And I have to admit here, and I know that many people will hate me for that, but I'm not a big Fassbinder fan, and I was also never a fan of his TV series. But I was traumatized by Fassbinder insofar that during the shoot I had a reoccurring nightmare that Rainer Werner Fassbinder came on set, and I tried to direct, and people wouldn't listen to me anymore, and they would only listen to Rainer Werner, and I always woke up while screaming, "Fuck off, piss off my set, Rainer! I don't want to have you here." But I think that was just like the pressure on set.
Well, you made an even better film out of that. We do have a question, if you can answer it in 1 minute. Can you please talk about the fatalism in France's thoughts?
Okay, let's try this. I think that what you lose when you have to flee, when you have to leave your country for whatever reason, economically, war, or any other reason, you lose your dignity. You lose some essential humanity, and I think that the job of my character in this movie is to reclaim his humanity. He has to find a way back into the human community, because the film begins when he's on the ocean, when he's lost on sea, and he loses his love. And how else than fatalistic can you go on in a new future? And how else can you go through life after this kind of experience? The movie starts the other way around. It was not shot like that. We shot the images like like normal, and then my editor said, "But how can we do that? Because the experience of being on the ocean and being lost and not knowing if you can survive this is something that most of us will never experience. So we have to turn the image around, because the world is like is completely like out of order, and we have to show that. And the world of Francis is out of order, and he goes, like many people ask why he has this weird relationship to Reinhold, who is a sadist, who is an asshole, who is like a terrible human being. But Franz goes back to him over and over and over again. And the answer that I give to that is that Franz is deeply traumatized person. He's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder in the purest sense, and he feels that he's guilty for the death of another person. So he looks for somebody who will punish him and who will and by punishing him, maybe give him like a certain kind of relief. And only when Franz loses his arm, loses his freedom, and loses the love of his life, he can say, "Stop! I have suffered enough, and I am back. I am back in this human mindset because the guilt is gone, or I've repented enough." And I think that is the mindset that Francis carries throughout the whole film.
And I think this is both powerful and hopeful, a moment of resistance, and I think a different viewpoint in this difficult and dark politics of migration and borders. A good, I think, powerful moment to complete the conversation, to thank you, to thank the audience for some great questions, and to complete this event here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the great questions from the audience, and also for your great moderation, and also this great conversation that we had.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just a final word, I would like to thank both Myria and Burhan for the time, the Goethe Institute for hosting this film with us, and to all the public for joining this discussion. I hope you'll join us at the next edition of the London Migration Film Festival in 2023, late November, early December. And thank you so much again.